back, everybody, to the Kentucky History Podcast, The Lamb Between the Meadows. We are here with another Kentucky Spotlight. I got Robert Khane here with me today. He's the creator of kypoliticaldata.com, Code for Kentucky, and he's also the host of my Old Kentucky podcast. And most importantly, he's a new father. So congratulations.
Yes. If you hear the baby crying upstairs, she's been a little fussy today. But yeah, I'm a new dad. I host a podcast. I have a website, and I'm a captain of a Code for America Brigade. So there you go. Those are the things that I do, I guess.
First off, thanks for joining us, man. Thanks for taking the time out this evening. Kentucky is playing at this moment. This is pre-recorded. Hopefully that turns out well.
Yeah. I got it on in the background here. It's all good. I'm very excited. Yeah, no, I'm very excited to have this conversation. I'm a big fan of this show. I've been listening. I think we talked a little before we got started. I've been listening since close to the beginning. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I did notice that, like, not too many, if any of your shows are about, like, urban spaces inside of Kentucky. And
that is true.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm, like, really passionate about right now, is for people both inside of Louisville. Like, it's like a long-standing thing to be like, oh, I'm from Louisville, but not Kentucky. And that's not true. You can't be from Louisville, not from Kentucky. And at the same time, and in the history of Kentucky incorporates Louisville. So I think a lot of times we're very divided about these types of things, and you know, one is maybe separate from the other. But some of the people that we're going to talk about, like, you know, Harvey Sloan, Mitch McConnell, Rebecca Jackson, you know, John Yarmouth, these people are just as Kentucky as any of the other people that we talk about. So I think that that's an important thing to remember and to think about. And yeah, it's one of the main reasons I'm excited to have this conversation.
Well, I agree 100%. That's one thing that we often talk about on the podcast. You know, Kentucky has got everything, man. It's got the hills, it's got the mountains, it's got the city. It's got it all, man.
Well, and I think that it is true. And oftentimes we kind of get stuck into our perspective of where we are. I don't know much of you. We were talking again a little ahead of time about, you know, your background being from Rockcastle County and living in pretty close to there now. You know, I had for my life, you know, three different kind of modes of ways that I experienced life. Like I'm from Louisville, and that's my home. I'm from the city. Like, I'm just a city guy. But my grandfather owned a farm in Anderson County, which is actually not too far from where you're situated, I guess. Yeah. So he actually was on the Spencer County line, so it's all the way across to the other side. But he owned that farm from the time that I was born until you know, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And, you know, so I grew up meeting those people, being exposed to country life. I'm not country at all. That's one of the things I learned from being there. But, you know, getting exposed to that way of life and seeing how those people who, you know, really agriculture, I watched the decline of tobacco happen in real time. You know, all of that, I got to see that. And then my dad and my wife actually, too, are from Ashland. So, like, kind of small city on the river. You know, which is a different kind of mode of living. And I kind of think like that small city, whether you're from like Ashland or Richmond or Bowling Green or Owensboro or Paducah or one of those places, like that's a different mode of living that people often overlook when we talk about ways to live life. So, you know, I'm happy to have had all of those experiences, even though, you know, I have only truly, you know, I only really have one as my identity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up those towns. I went to college and lived in Lexington for a while. Then I moved to Richmond, and of course, gradually moved back home. But it's different. I mean, they're different lifestyles, but yet they're all similar and connected too.
Yeah, and you know, we only have one state government that governs all of us, and the laws that we make in Frankfort are for everybody. So, you know, it is kind of a coming together of all these types of people. And the more that we learn about one another, I think that the better off we all are, and can make a life and make a society that really benefits everybody.
Make a better Kentucky, man.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, you bring up the point too about being, you know, the country lifestyle, but like I've lived in the, you know, country majority of my life, but yet I wouldn't be what you would call a typical country boy either.
Right.
You know, I don't have a big truck. I don't go hunting. You know, there's a lot of those things I don't do.
One of the things I think is really funny is that whenever you ask a city person what their perspective is on somebody that lives in the countryside or like outside of the city, really, it is like on a farm on several acres. And that's just not reality. And I think on the flip side, you know, if you ask somebody from outside of Louisville what it's like in here, there's a lot of misconceptions about that. You know, I've been dealing with that quite a bit in the past couple of months for sure. But that's I think that there's a lot to learn. Charles Booker, who ran for U.S. Senate. Hopefully people are familiar with him. He has that slogan like the hood to the holler. And I think that that's true. Like there's a lot of poor people across the state. It's a very poor state, and there are hoods and there are hollers. But I kind of wonder about like the shotgun house in Germantown to like the cul-de-sac outside of Madison or outside of Richmond. What the people in the middle class really don't know about each other in rural and urban spaces either. So
I agree. There's a lot more connects us than divides us, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, first question I got for you, pretty easy. What got you into podcasting in the first place? Because you've been doing. I mean, your show's been on for 2-3 years now.
4 years.
4 years.
Actually, just no. You know what? Yeah, that's right. It was 2016 when we first started. But actually, my podcasting days go before that. I lived in Lexington as well. I went to UK and I was on the radio, WRFL, which is the college radio station there. I had a friend that we actually did a movie show. You could you had to do training, you had to do volunteer stuff, but you could get a show on the radio. When we had it, it was like our time slot was like 7 a.m. on Wednesdays or something. So we were talking movies at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we both graduated, moved back here. We're both from Louisville, and we moved back here. We kind of restarted our life, learned what it was like to live in Louisville as an adult, and we were like, hey man, let's go ahead and get this back started. So we actually did that show on Crescent Hill Radio, and then we got brought over to as a podcast. Like they wanted to turn it into a podcast. We actually moved to Louisville Public Media, which is the NPR affiliate here in Louisville. He actually went into the film industry, so he moved away, and that show petered out. But that's kind of where I learned everything that I knew about podcasting. And Jasmine, my podcast partner, currently has been a friend of mine for a very, very long time. And I asked her if she wanted to give that a shot, and we did. And we've built an audience over a long time, and it's stuff that we're both really passionate about, and we enjoy doing it. So it's what it is. Yeah, you know that.
Yeah. You get something that you really enjoy, and that's I know it's a political podcast, and you talk about pretty much, and it's not just like politics. You're talking about the laws being passed and so forth. I really enjoy it because, from my perspective, you get on Facebook, and a lot of people say this too. You get the national media, and people often overlook the what's going on here in the state of Kentucky, and I really enjoy your podcast for that reason. I can get the state level stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of the reason we got started with it in the first place, is because both for me and Jasmine, Jasmine's a criminal defense attorney. We're both pretty progressive. I don't know if that's going to come through. Hopefully we're able to keep it pretty even keeled on this show. But if you listen to our show, that's the perspective we're coming from. And Jasmine's a criminal defense attorney. She's actually a public defender. And so state laws have a lot to do with her job on a day-to-day basis, and kind of the criminal justice system mostly flows through state law. So that's something that she's really passionate about. Me, I'm a public policy person. I actually went to UK's Martin School. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I didn't get a job in that space, so I wanted to keep with it at least on some level. So I started a podcast about Kentucky government and politics. It's just something I've been interested in my entire life, and apparently there are a few others of us at least. So that's good.
And that's one question I had. I guess this is probably my toughest question. How do you keep it as unbiased or as biased as possible without turning people off or in that manner?
Jasmine and I, we work very hard together. So she may have a different answer than me, but for me personally, I just try to make the show that I would want to listen to. I've spent a lot of time in my life with people that I don't necessarily agree with their ideas. So I mostly just try to, if I know an opinion is going to be controversial or an issue is going to be controversial, I try to be very upfront about what I think is the right thing. I try to at least give as much credence as I can to the other side. If I don't think an argument holds water, I'll say it. But I try to give as much grace to the opinion as I possibly can. So we do our best to try to keep it fair. And honestly, we've had people, Republicans in the legislature, reach out to us even and be like, I like your show. I think it's I'm sure it drives them crazy sometimes, but it is good to know that they are at least able to listen to it, not get too mad that they have to turn it off. So,
well, I enjoy it. It's good.
I'm glad. Thank you.
It's good that other people may. It's good that other people, I guess, on both sides are listening to it, because it is informative. Like I said, people get bogged down by the national media, and that begins. I think that tends to divide us more than need to. People are all about voting for the president's election, but what about the other ones? The governor and the ones that really affect the state more than anything.
Well, Kentucky had, and this is in terms of political history in Kentucky. Kentucky used to be very, very willing to vote for Republicans on the national level for president and even for Senate for a long time. But our state government on the state legislature was, of course, dominated by Democrats for a very long time. The Kentuckians were very willing to split their ticket on that level. And it has been really, in the past couple of decades, really just the past decade, really, that's very much fallen apart. And basically, however you vote for president is how you're going to vote for state representative as well. And, I think that's bad. But, there's ways to maybe break out of that if that's not something that you necessarily want to do. And getting informed about state issues is something that's one way you could go about doing it, for sure.
Yeah. Real quickly before we got a specific topic you brought up, but tell us about KentuckyPoliticalData.com. Yeah,
so one of the things that my background is kind of in public policy, and we did a lot of social science research, and then I'm a data scientist. That's my actual job these days, and that's a field that kind of grew up around me. That didn't really exist at the time, and so basically I had to find a way to learn the skills that would be relevant to me in the job market. And working with data is, a marketable skill, but it's kind of hard to learn. And the way to do it successfully is to find something you're interested in and learn around that. So I'm very interested in Kentucky government, Kentucky politics, and there's a lot of data about elections, about fundraising, about all kinds of different stuff. The legislature itself. So basically, I wanted to teach myself skills, and building the Kentucky KYPoliticalData.com was one way that I went about doing it. I used to just kind of like throw stuff up on my Twitter or on my Facebook or something, and I was like, well, these are kind of ephemeral if they're on social media. They just kind of disappear. So I want to create somewhere that they would exist. So I kind of created this website. That's a way to kind of create images, graphics, kind of analyze what's going on, both in the legislature, in elections over time, and in political fundraising. So that, it was mostly to learn a skill, but other people find it useful. I've had, people who actually work in the legislature be like, I go to this every day. Sometimes they're already my friends, so they're trying to probably just be nice to me. So, there's that exists out there for people who want to see other kind of stuff. It's a little fragile. It may break. If it breaks, just let me know. I'll fix it. So
hit refresh, right?
Yeah, just keep doing that. That's fine.
So whenever I first reached out to you about coming on the show and talking a little bit, you brought up the topic about the Jefferson County Louisville city merger, and it fits right in. You're very correct. We have not talked about as much as far as on the podcast about the more urban areas, and not that we won't get there. Well, eventually, hopefully, we will get there.
Well, you're getting to it right now. That's it. Yeah.
So take us away. Give us a little intro or info on.
Well, not just when I talked to you about that as well. Not only was it an urban area, but also a lot of your stuff focuses in on the 18th and 19th century.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah. And this is a story that's about the 20th century and even into the 21st century. So I love history from the 18th and 19th century. I think it's very interesting. But I'm very, very interested in 20th and beginning of the 21st century history, because I think a lot of it is, everything's real. All of history just kind of repeats itself over and over again, or at least
sadly.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I think you can kind of, if you look, 20 to 30 years ago, you can really start to see how gambles people made, ways that people acted, decisions that got made really, really impacted the world that we're in today. And I think it's kind of fun to look back that far, not that far, like, 20, 30 years, to kind of say, what were they thinking and how did that pan out? Because it's still kind of panning out now. So that's kind of the thing. Wanted to talk about an urban area, something big that happened that I thought, there isn't a lot of people that talk about that to this day, but it really does have a huge impact on Kentucky's politics and Kentucky's government even to this very day. So that was why I wanted to talk about Louisville and Jefferson County merger.
Wow, it sounds pretty good. Just coming from my end of it, when I lived in Lexington, it was all the Lexington Fayette urban or
LFUCG, Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. Yeah. They were actually first. Yeah, they merged. I think like 20 years ahead of Louisville. Merger is not something that many places have undertaken across the country, but Lexington was one that did it. And I mean, I would say even to this day, Lexington's merger is significantly more successful than Louisville's, just in terms of the way that they're governing themselves. I think that there's a lot of decisions that they made. They have nonpartisan elections for their council people. They have at-large council districts. Louisville has partisan elections for 27 different districts across the city, nothing at large. So it's a very diluted power structure. Louisville allowed for all of the individual municipalities to continue to exist. So Louisville actually still has, I think, like something like more than 50 mayors inside of Jefferson County.
What?
I just listened to your show today, actually, about Livingston. And that guy, I guess he's the mayor of Livingston. He was talking about sitting with all the mayors in Rockcastle County, and there was like 10 of them. It's like, I'm just as important as any of those 10 mayors. And, Louisville, Jefferson County has, I think it's like 80, maybe 80 mayors. But, there's definitely a power structure there, with Louisville and Greg Fisher there at the top, Jeffersontown and St. Matthews there in the middle. And then I actually live in one of those tiny municipalities. It's called Strathmore Village. I think that there's 200 people in this specific municipality, but there's reasons why these places exist. We actually have a police officer. He drives around the 3 blocks of my city. So we pay taxes to have him drive around here. So, it's fine. But yes, that's a thing that Louisville has that Lexington doesn't. So getting back to the original point, Lexington's merger, I think, was ultimately, from a government standpoint, more successful. There's other ways in which I think Louisville's situation has worked out very well for us.
Well, I would think the size too. I mean, Louisville is tremendously bigger than Lexington, so that would probably help that a lot.
There's political realities. I already mentioned St. Matthews and Jeffersontown. We call it J-Town here in Louisville. If you may have heard of J-Town. Their high school there in J-Town does really well. They won the state basketball tournament not that long ago. Anyways, those 2 small cities, those 2 small municipalities are very large and have well-established, city governments, essentially. Shively is another big one. That's in South Louisville. And, those municipalities were not going to give up their power. But so in order to earn their votes, and this is something we can probably get into, but in order to earn their votes, they basically had to draw it up in a way that those cities would be able to retain at least some authority and some ability to govern themselves. So it's not a perfect document. There's a lot of political realities that they had to deal with. They were coming out of multiple failures. So that kind of sets it all up. But before we get into it, I did kind of want to mention, I actually had a really cool experience about a year ago where I went and, got to meet a lot of Native Americans who lived up in the northern Kentucky Cincinnati area. And one of the things they mentioned is that they like it whenever people talk about the history of an area to mention the people whose lands that they were on originally. So I went through and I looked it up. And, I learned this. The first people that kind of settled the area that would become Louisville are called the Adinas. There's not too much. This is like way back in ancient history, from like 800 BC all the way like 1,000 years up until like basically the AD calendar started. The next group is actually the Hopewell Indians, and they actually have some mounds that you can see outside of northern Kentucky. But they lived there until about 500 AD. And then the next groups that were there were the Miami and the Osage. And this is kind of the area where there's a little bit more of a clear record, and there's lots of evidence that these groups were present along the Ohio River for sure. The other areas from more ancient history, they just kind of say like, oh, we have evidence that they were here and they were here, so we're assuming they're kind of between all of these places. But the Miami and the Osage, they definitely know they were along the Ohio River all the way down as far as Louisville, probably to the point of European contact. But of course, like, European contact didn't get all the way into Kentucky till much later. And then the last kind of groups that were native to this, Native Americans that were in the Louisville area, the Shawnee and the Cherokee. And the Shawnee were coming from the north, and the Cherokee were coming from the south. And they kind of were split, like right where Louisville is. And of course, that makes sense because that's where the Falls of the Ohio is. That's why Louisville is where it is. A lot of times when we talk about Native history in Kentucky, there's this idea of like the happy hunting ground This is another thing that I learned where, they say like there's not a lot of Native people that were in Kentucky at the time of contact. And from a historical standpoint, that is true. But one of the other things that I learned is like we kind of use that as like an abdication of our responsibility towards the entire situation towards Native people. And so like the reason it wasn't a lot of people there is because like it was a divided territory. The Cherokee and the Cherokee and the Shawnee were fighting over it a little bit, so they kind of just left it empty. And then when you add another group of people in there, that of course stirs everything up. And as we talk about Native people in antiquity, I think a lot of times we talk about Native American attacks in the same way that we talk about like attacks by wolves or bears. But really, like their political calculations in the civilization that were making the decision to attack in that place, in the same way that white people do that as well. So that's kind of the history of what happened. Once white people got here, a lot of things happened in the 18th and 19th century, but the story of Louisville and Jefferson County merging really kind of starts in the 1970s. So we're making a big step forward. Okay, so Louisville's population relative to Jefferson County. So Louisville, of course, is the city. It has always been the largest city in Jefferson County. It was chartered back in 1778. Or no, it was founded in 1778. It was chartered in 1828. So that's kind of when Louisville was started. And Louisville has always been the most populous city in Jefferson County. But in the in kind of the later half of the 20th century, a lot of people started moving out of Louisville and into Jefferson County in unincorporated areas and small cities in there. And, there's a lot of reasons for that, but most of it was for white flight. As the civil rights movement started to happen, there was a lot more sort of like social unrest around there. And in the 1970s, 60,000 people ended up moving out of Louisville, which is a lot of people, especially relative to like the size of a lot of other places. Sure, and that's about 15% of the city's total population. Actually moved out. But one thing that made it a little unique is this is not a phenomenon that's unique to Louisville. This happened all over the country. But one thing that did make Louisville a little bit unique is that people did not move out of the county. They mostly just moved inside of the county out of Louisville. So, there are a lot of different sort of like public policy ways that we started to deal with this kind of situation. And one of the things that did happen in 1975, city and county school districts merged. This was a very, very hotly contested thing. My mother was actually in the first integrated class at Central High School. She graduated from Central High School. You don't want to get her talking about that. My wife actually says, like, whenever your mom starts talking about busing, I have to leave the room. And so, it was a rough situation. A lot of people felt, like it wasn't a good solution. But, at the end of the day, today, Louisville is actually, in Jefferson County Public Schools are thought of as one of the most integrated school districts in the whole country, especially for how divided the real estate is in this city. That's actually something that Louisville's looking at dealing with, changing right now for different sorts of reasons, which we're not going to get into today. So that was something that happened in 1975. So that was one of the things that started happening, but the impact of a big exodus of all of those people meant that the city's tax base was much smaller. Even though many people who lived in Jefferson County that lived in Jefferson County but not in Louisville, they still commuted to work. They worked in Louisville, and they lived in Jefferson County outside of Louisville. And so by the early 1980s, business leaders started really pushing for a merger because of tax issues. The downtown area was really starting to suffer from not a lot of the tax-based issues, even though there were a lot of people working there. It was hard to tax that because that's not necessarily where people lived. And so in 1982 and in 1983, there was a ballot initiative. And then one in 1982 failed. The plan was incredibly detailed. It had significant provisions for what would happen with each municipality in terms of how they would deal with it and kind of how they would disappear over time. And in 1982 and in 1983, the ballot initiatives inside of Louisville failed. It's kind of interesting to look back on this, though. One of the major fans of merger back then was the judge executive for Jefferson County, Jameson. Can you guess who that person was?
The judge executive. So in the 80s?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, the 1980s.
I'm just gonna make a guess, but I'm gonna say Mitch McConnell.
It was absolutely, it was Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell was at the time, the judge executive of Jefferson County. And that's, of course, where he ran for Senate originally, not too long after that. But in 1982 and in 1983, he was one of the biggest cheerleaders for the entire idea. And then some of the major opponents included the NAACP, many other like black-led groups across the city, union groups. A lot of the more liberal folks in town in Louisville were very opposed to the idea of merger. And actually on the day when it was defeated, Georgia Davis Powers, who was she's a very important black female legislator in the state of Kentucky. She was a state senator. She's from Louisville. She actually gave the victory speech when merger was defeated. She's a very important person historically. Again, another one of those people who is a Louisvillian, but also Kentucky, and that's a person who's very important in Kentucky history as well. So, the merger issue being on both the 1981 and 1980. Did I say that right? Which years was it? In 1982 and in 1983, losing both years, it kind of settled the issue for the time. They were like, okay, this isn't going to happen. Clearly, that's not what the city wants. There is some historical, there's some papers that mention an attempted merger back in the 50s. I couldn't find any information about it at all. I heard about this thing called the Malin Plan, but that wasn't really a full city-county merger. Anyways, it seemed like it started in one paper and then kind of infested a lot of others. But anyways, that's all I could find about it was this thing called the Malin Plan. So that was kind of like where things sat after the 80s, where there was this big attempt to merge the city and the county, and it didn't happen. Now, I have a lot of friends up in Northern Kentucky, and this is actually kind of funny to talk about these kind of issues because they're facing them kind of now. Where they, are the suburbs of Cincinnati, and they have a lot of people that live in Cincinnati, or live in Northern Kentucky, but work in Cincinnati, and they kind of have tax issues where a lot of times where your business is located is where you pay payroll taxes, or and so they have tax issues where they think like, we aren't getting what we're due, and Cincinnati, of course, thinks like, all these people live in Northern Kentucky, so we don't get their, taxes that are due because of their residence. So they have issues going back and forth all the time up there as well. This is it's just to a smaller extent an issue in places like Murray, Kentucky, at places like Richmond, Kentucky, where the city and the county kind of have an interesting and fraught relationship. Anywhere that there's like a city and a county, a decent sized city, anytime you get over 10,000, you start to have issues.
That's probably, that's not a problem in Lincoln County or Rocky.
No. Oh yeah, that's Lincoln County. That's one of the three original, right, along with Jefferson.
Yeah.
This is you no longer can say to your guest, my county is older than yours. Ours can be all at the same time. That's very much. So that's kind of like what happened. It kind of failed there in the 80s. So the city started trying to find other solutions to these problems that they existed. Like merger would have solved all of them. Sure, probably. What are other things we can do? The library, the parks and recreations groups, the zoo, lots of other government organizations that had kind of been divided between the two, but provided benefits to both. They were kind of merged together. So, the Louisville parks, there's a lot of awesome parks, like actually inside of the city of Louisville, and there's a lot of beautiful parks outside of the city boundaries, what we now call the Urban Services District. Our Olmsted parks, we have several Olmsted parks, some of which are inside of the city limits and some of which are outside, and that kind of gave us the ability to govern them all as one entity. That's the parks. The library systems, like we mentioned, the school districts were already merged, but the libraries kind of went together at the same time too. So there were like smaller groups that were kind of being merged together. That of course creates new problems though, because who's the ultimate authority? You have a library board who and if like it's hard to make full big strategies that incorporate lots of different parts of the government when like the library is this merged entity between city and county, and the city wants to do something with the library, but they have to have the county's permission essentially at that point. So you introduce all kinds of other problems as well. In 1985, that was a big year for things around merger type activities. Jefferson County and Louisville put together this thing that's called the Compact. And they called it that forever. It was an occupational tax that shared the revenue between Louisville and Jefferson County based on where people live. So it's basically a 1.5% flat fee across the entire county, wherever you, and then if you lived in Louisville, inside the city districts, you got the county would basically write the city a check at the end of the year for whatever their amount of money was for that. And the reason they put that together is because there were some kind of economic development fights that started developing between Louisville and Jefferson County, where they were like, "Oh, don't go downtown. Come out to Jefferson County. Well, it'll be better for you." So that put an end to all of that. That kind of reduced the benefits to do, economic development in one versus the other.
Yeah.
And then another thing that the city started doing is it started annexing a lot of unincorporated land. And after the 1980s, you can kind of see the city growing. And actually, this again, we're seeing this happen in Covington. If you look at Covington, the city of Covington actually has grown substantially in the past couple of decades by annexing a lot of unincorporated land inside of Kenton County. So they're kind of going through the same thing right now. Now, Kenton has a lot of other big cities. So I don't know if the people there in Bellevue or Newport are going to want to.
Let me ask you this question here: How would that work with Cincinnati? I mean, can Cincinnati? Could they? I mean, how is that? Is that possible?
No, so because it's across state lines. I mean, Louisville has this as well. Like we have a flip side where we have. We already mentioned Jefferson Town, but we have Jeffersonville on the other side of the river in New Albany, Indiana, and we have the same problems. Now, they were more pronounced when there was Louisville and Jefferson County versus like Louisville and Southern Indiana. So crossing state lines, you could never do it. Now, Covington could merge. I believe there's like actually a list of cities and counties that could technically merge, and I wish I'd have had that in front of me. That's actually there's a list that exists somewhere, and it's got some smaller cities that you'd be surprised. Like I actually think Murray and Callaway could technically merge if they wanted. You'd have to get permission from the state government. But which is another wrinkle in this whole thing. You have to get permission before you're able to do it. But anyways, Covington could certainly, if it was able to pull its weight, could merge with Kenton County. Now, that what I was mentioning is not necessarily Cincinnati, but the other small cities inside of Kenton County. And I think Newport probably even has more heft inside of Kenton County than St. Matthews does inside of Louisville. So good luck to Covington if that's ever the solution. Right. So again, like that's kind of where we're sitting is here. We realize that merger's not going to happen for at least a little while, and everybody's trying to put in these solutions. But two personality, go ahead.
Louisville snatching up land.
Right, Louisville snatching up land, trying to figure out something to do. Now, the next thing I want to mention is there are two personalities that become very important to this story. Both of them are still alive, doing different things. So, if somehow they listen to this and want to correct something, they can, call me up on the phone. So the first person I wanted to mention is Jerry Abramson. A lot of people probably know him maybe as the mayor of Louisville. He was pretty high profile. He was, of course, a lieutenant governor in Kentucky with Steve Beshear during his second term. He actually left early to go work in the Obama White House. Kurt Llewellyn finished out his term, so there's some trivia about Jerry Abramson. But he eventually he served as mayor of Louisville. That's, I think, what he's most famous for. What he did kind of the most. He ended up being mayor of Louisville for 20 years.
Wow,
which is quite a long time. And how that was able to happen is something that we can kind of get into. In 1986, he was a Louisville lawyer. He'd served as an alderman. We don't have city council people are called different things in different places, but Louisville used to have aldermen, and I think Chicago has aldermen. I don't really know, but aldermen have wards. I don't know what this means, but anyways, Jerry Abramson was a Louisville alderman, and he was the general counsel to John Y. Brown, who was the governor in Kentucky. He was 37 years old when he was first elected governor. Wow. So neither one of us are 37, but we're closing in on it. So we have a ways to. We have a couple years if we want to catch it. So
we can get elected soon. We might be able to.
Yeah, there you go. And while he was mayor, a lot of good things happened. In the 80s and 90s, I think that it's fair to say that those were pretty good decades for the city of Louisville. There were a lot of opportunities that were missed. So there are a lot of people who said we could have been quite a bit better, but I think a lot of good things did happen. During that time, things like Riverfront Park, Slugger Field, the Science Center, the downtown revitalization there, like 4th Street Live, the Extreme Park, Louisville Glassworks, maybe those might be like greatest hits. If you end up in Louisville, you might have gone to like one of those. Yeah. I don't know what your experience is.
I've been to Slugger Field plenty of times.
There you go.
To watch soccer, actually, though. To watch soccer.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. Well, no longer. They're no longer.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, so the new stadium is open. Anyway, so that was not completed when Jerry Abramson was mayor, but the baseball stadium actually wasn't completed when he was mayor, but it was started. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of cool stuff in Louisville during the 70s or the 80s and 90s. And depending on who you asked, Jerry Abramson either like made all of that possible, or he was at least like standing there when it all happened. A part of it, yeah, absolutely. And you know, that's a very divisive topic in Louisville, depending on who you ask, for sure. But one thing is true: by the time he left the mayor's office after the end of his third term, that was 1998, the city like retooled its New Year's Eve party to be mostly like a farewell Jerry party. So they gave Jerry Abramson the New Year's Eve party. So people loved him. He had pretty high approval ratings, I think it's fair to say. And the only person who actually served as mayor of Louisville after Abramson, before merger, was this guy named Dave Armstrong. And he actually defeated Tom Owen. Tom, also still alive. You should have him on your show if you want to talk Louisville. He is a Louisville historian. He's the very best Louisville historian, in my opinion. He's getting a little older, but he used to do bike tours where into his 60s and 70s, where he would you'd ride your bike around town, and he'd tell you all about it. He works at the University of Louisville. He almost became mayor. He lost to Dave Armstrong. It was a very, very close election. And, you know, since we're talking about municipalities in Jefferson County, Jerry Abramson was born in Strathmore Village, which is where I live now. So that little municipality of like 200 people or whatever, Jerry Abramson was born here. So where I'm recording this from. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first person I wanted to talk about. The second person I wanted to talk about is this woman named Rebecca Jackson. Now, y'all probably don't know too much about Rebecca Jackson. She's also still alive. Jerry Abramson may be a name you heard of before. So Mitch McConnell's probably the most famous person to hold office as the Jefferson County Judge Executive. He served from 1977 to 1984. And then after McConnell came two Democrats who were most known for serving within Louisville city government. You know, they're still eligible to run for Judge Executive, of course. Mayor Harvey Sloan, another really famous Louisville mayor, and eventual mayor Dave Armstrong, the man we just mentioned. He was the Judge Executive before he became mayor. So these two men were after Mitch McConnell, but Mitch McConnell always had his sights set on the Judge Executive's office because it was winnable for Republicans. And it's kind of hard to think about this at the time, where we're sitting from now. But suburban Louisville, outside of Jefferson County, was one of the most Republican areas in the entire state for most of the 20th century. You know, you had Northern Kentucky, you had, the old Fifth. You're getting close to there. I don't know if Rockcastle is necessarily in the old Fifth, but down there around Pulaski County, Corbin, London area, that's very Republican. And suburban Louisville. And those were kind of the areas of strength for Republicans in this time. And Mitch McConnell thought, the judge executive of Louisville, of Jefferson County, should be a Republican. This is a position we can hold. And so Republicans put up the county clerk, Rebecca Jackson, for judge executive, and were successful at electing her. They also had a woman named Barbara Holsclaw, who actually she won the clerk job after Rebecca Jackson left it. And she actually still holds that job to this day. So, there's a few Democrats hanging out there that are still judge executives in random little counties in Western Kentucky where there's basically 5 Democrats left. Barbara Holsclaw is Louisville's version of this. She's a Republican office holder for the entirety of Jefferson County, continues to won 2 years ago as a Republican. So, and Democrats, for whatever reason, don't want to challenge her. She does a good job as clerk. I don't know why that's a partisan office anyway. This has been a crazy election, and I feel like our plan's pretty good. So she's still effective. So anyways, we had the Republicans ended up taking the county clerk's office and the judge executive's office. And so it was kind of thought, okay, Republicans are going to find a seat of power in Jefferson County. We're going to find a way to hold power. And this was also starting to be around the time when you saw Ann Northam, another woman. And it's probably also worth mentioning, these are all Republican women. which is something that's a little bit unusual also now. A lot of that's something that's changed a lot in our politics, especially in terms of office holders. Now there are still lots of good Republican women serving the state in Kentucky across the state. But anyways, Ann Northup also won the Louisville U.S. House Congress seat and held it for quite a while, which was a thorn in the side of Democrats quite a bit. So anyways, this was kind of the ascendancy of Republicans in the 90s in the entirety of Jefferson County. And Rebecca Jackson, was one of the main people who was a part of it. So, it kind of was, these two people, Rebecca Jackson and Jerry Abramson, these two people were kind of thinking different things when the idea of merger came back up. So Abramson and Jackson had their own reasons, right? Of course, Louisville Democrats basically ran the show in the city, and Jerry Abramson was out of the mayor's office, didn't really know what he was going to do. We've had two governors in a row that have come from Louisville, but before that, I don't even know if we've had two in total before that. There's probably, the people from Louisville, politicians from Louisville, have a really hard time figuring out what to do after they're done being mayor of Louisville. And so Jerry Abramson, as a very powerful, popular former mayor, was trying to think of something to do, and was like, well, why don't we merge the city and county and I'll run that? At least that's what a lot of people tell the story. That's why he wanted to support a merger. Republicans saw it as a much more strategic opportunity. You remember back in the 80s, the reason why people didn't want to merge, the main opponents to mergers were liberals, black folks, union folks, that was basically the opposition to merger. And Republicans saw the flip side of that, a way for them to expand their power in Jefferson County. So they made a strategic idea. Okay, well, if Jerry Abramson wants to push forward merger so he can be mayor, that's fine. We'll end up with more power once he's out of it. So it may be a longer term play there for him. We'll see how it turns out for him. So, and then, of course, that's the political side of it. But, of course, there's a huge governmental issue as well. The administration of the city is very difficult. We started to merge these smaller groups like the library, the parks, etc. But, I already mentioned kind of the problems about that. Those still remain. We still had this weird tax situation where the county's writing a check to the city at the end of the year. It would be much better if we could just find a way to deal with all that. So the merger, of course, was going to solve that problem. They did end up putting together, I wrote the number down, 93 municipalities inside of Jefferson. 93, man. Yeah. That is,
I would have no idea that existed, but
I don't think it's quite that many now, but at the time of merger, that was the number.
Yeah.
Okay, so as the document was drawn up for merger, it drew together all of the Jefferson County and Louisville departments, but it didn't actually do anything about those suburban municipalities. To this day, like I mentioned, we still have our police department in Strathmore Village. Jeffersontown actually is the 15th largest city in all of Kentucky, and St. Matthews is the 23rd largest city in Kentucky. So, more than a lot of, towns you probably have heard of. J-Town is larger in size than, all but just a few. And they also maintain their own separate services.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 2000 General Assembly in Frankfort, the state legislature passed a bill allowing Jefferson County to merge with Louisville. And that's how it has to happen. All the way back at the beginning when we first started talking, Jameson, I kind of thought, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because state government is really important to all of us. In order for Louisville to do basically anything, the state has to give their blessing. And that's an example. In 2000, in order to do this merger, the state had to give its blessing to do that. And they did. The bill sponsor was Mary Lou Marzian, also still in the legislature, my state representative. The bill put forth became basically the Louisville Metro government. 26 members and a council elected by district and in a partisan manner. And that was basically the way that the legislative part of Metro Louisville would be governed. Most of the limited opposition to that bill actually came from progressive and liberal Democrats inside of Louisville. Eleanor Jordan, we talked about Georgia Davis Powers, Eleanor Jordan, another black woman in the same sort of vein, I interviewed Attica Scott on my show a couple of times, and she talks about both of those women as people who she looks to in the past as, inspiring her. Joni Jenkins, currently the Democratic leader, she was opposed to it. She's in Shively, which is another one of those very powerful cities. That might be one of the reasons she was opposed to it. I think her dad is actually mayor of Shively. Tom Reiner, who actually is famous these days. He was one of the people who actually flipped from Democrat to Republican in South Louisville when Matt Bevin asked him to, and then was summarily defeated in a general election. Charlie Miller, also still there. And Perry Clark, who's actually just retiring now. One Republican opposed to Kevin Bratcher. He is also still there. He's in Louisville as well. Both Rebecca Jackson and Jerry Abramson spoke for the merger in Frankfort. County Commissioner Darrell Owens, who would eventually serve in Frankfort as a state representative. Charles Booker took over for him when he retired as a state rep. He spoke against it. He was one of the people who actually spoke against it. Okay. After the bill was signed, Jerry Abramson immediately started campaigning, not surprising, wanting to be Metro mayor. And he faced he started, after the bill was signed in Frankfort, he started campaigning to get the city merged. And there's actually a really interesting article that I read in the Courier Journal from this period about him going out to Middletown and J-Town, which probably was one of the first times he'd ever really been out that far. I actually grew up in Middletown, which is a pretty large municipality inside Jefferson County. And it was kind of funny. All those people in Louisville or Middletown and Jeffersontown were like, no, we don't want this. And he was like, well, this is going to be kind of hard, I guess. So that is what happened. He started campaigning. Rebecca Jackson started campaigning. And honestly, a major point for the pro-merger position was the LFUCG. LFUCG, the merged Lexington government, in the 2000 census would have been larger than the city of Louisville. And that would have been the first census where that had actually happened.
Wow.
So I honestly think probably the main reason we ended up voting for this was because we didn't want to fall behind Lexington. So that's kind of funny. More realistic reasons, people were really thinking that Louisville was losing ground to places like Nashville and Indianapolis. And that's a main theme in our government to this day. Louisville pushed really hard back then to land the Vancouver Grizzlies and Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets are back in Charlotte, but they eventually became the New Orleans Hornets and then the New Orleans Pelicans. And the Vancouver Grizzlies, of course, landed in Memphis. So at Tennessee Town. So that was something that people in Louisville pointed to as a big failure. Humana used to be the largest operator of hospitals in the country. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. They think of them now as just this health insurance group, a very, very large health insurance group. But they also used to operate a huge amount of hospitals. And they actually spun that company out. That company was trying to pick a headquarters, and Louisville pushed really hard to keep them in Louisville. But they ended up deciding to move to Nashville, where they merged with HCA, which is a huge operation there in Nashville.
That was pretty recent, though, wasn't it?
It was before 2000, actually.
Okay.
So it was before merger, and it was it was an issue. It was an issue that people pointed to. Those were kind of the main parts of the campaign around merger. The opposition was this group that was started organizing called COST, and they were called Citizens Organized in Search of the Truth. Anyways, well, sure. And the S was a $sign.
Cost too much.
Anyways, I guess it was an amalgamation of a lot of civil rights organizations and labor unions and same people who opposed merger in the 1980s. But added to that list from the 1980s was a lot of folks in the burgeoning gay rights movement. And that was a big deal. And somewhere between 1983 and 2000, Louisville passed an anti-discrimination or fairness ordinance in the city. These are things that I think there's 16 or 17 in Kentucky now. The fairness campaign is actually what they're called. And they had the roots in getting Louisville's fairness ordinance passed. And now they campaign to get these passed in cities across Kentucky. And they were very concerned that if Louisville merged with Jefferson County, the ascendant Republicans would strip away that fairness ordinance for LGBTQ people. That's the politics of gay rights are a lot different in 2020 than they were in 2000.
Yeah,
we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think that was probably a fair fear for them to have back then. And whereas in 2020, if we were to merge, it may not be as real.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So those were kind of the forces that were kind of grouped up in opposition to it. A lot of more liberal folks and a lot of the same folks that opposed merger back in the 80s. But in Election Day on 2000, it didn't bring a lot of finality to the presidential race.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Bush and Gore that ended up in the Supreme Court, but merger passed by a pretty wide margin. Ended up passing 54 to 46 in terms of percentage. Pro-merger groups raised $1 million for the campaign.
Wow.
There are some state rep races that are now more than $1 million. Angie Hatton, who is the state rep down in Letcher County, this is apocryphal. I've heard her say that there was $3 million spent against her in 2016. I don't know if that's real or not, but she mentions that. There was a lot of money spent down there in Whitesburg, but
in Letcher County,
I don't know if it was that much. But there are some state rep races that run into get pretty close to $1 million.
Yeah.
And especially in terms of like other money besides what's actually raised by the campaigns. But raising $1 million in 2000 was a huge deal.
That is a lot for 20 years ago.
And that was kind of what put him over the edge. My biggest memory, let's see, 2000, I would have been 14, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest memory, just turned 14, I guess, because I'm born right before Election Day. My biggest memory from that, watching television, was somebody from the Cost campaign saying, I guess Jerry Abramson wants to be mayor forever. And so after merger happened, Louisville did elect its first Metro Council and its first mayor. Mm-hmm. And to no one's surprise, Jerry Abramson was the first mayor of Metro Louisville. And he actually served for 8 years in that office. You're allowed to run for 3 terms for Louisville mayor. Greg Fisher is in his 3rd term currently. Mm-hmm. And after he decided against running for a 3rd term in 2010, he actually ran for lieutenant governor. And we mentioned that already. But he became lieutenant governor in 2011. Joined that ticket with Steve Beshear, kicked Dan Mongiardo off the ticket. And then he resigned that office in 2014. To work for the Obama White House. He's actually currently the executive in residence at Spalding University, which is a small Catholic college in downtown Louisville.
Yeah. Captain Spalding.
Yes, that's right. So I actually saw him. There's a small French restaurant inside of Bowman Field Airport. Jameson, have you ever read the Cornbread Mafia?
I've never read the book. I've heard plenty of it.
You got to read it. But anyways, the Bowman Field Airport plays a pretty significant role in that book. Anyways, if that may be where people have heard of it from. Yeah. It's very close to my house. I went there for my birthday. It's a nice restaurant. I went there for my birthday. And Jerry Abramson was sitting at the table next to mine. And he was very personable. He actually came over and when he saw it was my birthday, wished me a happy birthday. Always a politician, I guess. So he's still around. He's still in town doing stuff. So he was very successful. Rebecca Jackson, the other person that we talked about at the beginning, who was very key to getting this merger done, she never actually ran for Louisville mayor. In 2003, she actually ran for governor. She lost in that primary to Ernie Fletcher, and he of course eventually became the first Republican governor in Kentucky since Louis B. Nunn in the 60s. Yeah, it was the 60s, right? I think that's the 60s. Yeah. So okay, the whole purpose for Republicans supporting this merger was that they felt like that they were ascendant in Jefferson County. By merging, they could have a lot more power. Mm-hmm. And really, in the first couple phases of Metro Council, that did come to fruition. So right after the Metro Council was elected, of course, there were more Democrats than Republicans. And that was always going to be the case just by the way that you drew the lines. Yeah. But Kelly Downard, a Republican, actually became the president of Metro Council. President of Metro Council being the same as like Speaker of the House or President of the Senate. Yeah. He became the president of Metro Council in 2004 by convincing a few Democrats to cross party lines to support him. And he managed to give Republicans a lot more power on the council than they would have had ahead of time. And really a lot more power than a minority caucus usually has in a legislative body. That was very kind of interesting and maybe a little shady. One of the people who voted for Kelly Downard as president very shortly after gave up their seat and took in a political appointment from Ernie Fletcher. So that's kind of how
this was politics. Is that what?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of how it goes. So Republicans were finding ways to be successful in the early days of the council. But Democrats, of course, were very aggravated by this. And in 2005, Barbara Shanklin, who is a Democrat who's on the council, she's actually leaving this year, but she's still there currently. Mm-hmm. She became the president of Metro Council 2 years later after they had their next kind of vote on it. She became the president on the 100th ballot. So there's even number of people, 13 to 13, and Republicans won by 1. Democrats got a defection back onto their side, but it was 13-13. And they weren't going to leave until they figured out who was going to be the president. So it went to 100 ballots.
Wow.
One of the Democratic council members finally crossed back over the line to support Barbara Shanklin at 2:00 in the morning. The person who was actually covering that for the Courier-Journal at the time was Joe Girth, who's currently a columnist for the newspaper. This was back when he was a reporter. I actually meant to reach out to him and ask him about that night, but he's got some interesting perspective on this. It was kind of funny. It was like the next day, the newspaper works a lot different. It would not have run the next day. These days, it would have been just online. But yes, Joe Girth very clearly is like sick and tired of sitting there listening to people do the same thing over again. So that happened. Democrats regained control of the Metro Council in 2005. So Kelly Downard, was the Metro Council president, lost that spot, and he did eventually run for mayor. He ran for mayor against Jerry Abramson in 2006, and he lost by a 67-31 margin. So this is kind of starting to be the beginning of the end for Republicans in Louisville. And in the 2010 election, the first election without Jerry Abramson, Democrats actually ran a really tough primary. It was kind of assumed that the winner was going to become the mayor. Greg Fisher won that nomination, but it was a rough race. It was a lot of really negative campaigning, a lot of really tough stuff happening. Fisher was an entrepreneur who'd previously run for United States Senate. He lost that nomination to Bruce Lunsford, another person who was also an entrepreneur in Louisville. He really, really wanted to hold elected office in some capacity. And it is true. That election, the general election, was very tight in 2010, but it's worth remembering that 2010 was a really, really bad year for Democrats nationally. That's another thing we talked about. People really started to nationalize their ballots. And that was the Tea Party. That was a thing that was happening across the country. And, massive GOP backlash to the Obama administration. And Hal Heiner, who was an East End Republican council member, he came within 2 points of defeating Greg Fisher. But really, ever since then, Republican fortunes in Louisville have really reversed course. So initially, Democrats controlled 15 of the 26 seats. So that's pretty close. That's like a four-seat majority. Enough that, if you get a couple people to switch sides, Kelly Downard can become Metro Council president. But by the mid-2000s, Republicans in the south end of Louisville, if people are interested in knowing about like the different politics, the different parts of Louisville, the south end is, I would say it's, middle class, lower middle class, working class for sure. And it's more integrated than the East End probably, but it's more white than the West End. That's, I guess, one way to put it. So there were some successful Republicans in the South End, but shortly after the 2010 election, that kind of disappeared for them. Democrats grew their majority to 17-9 in 2007. And then in the 2018 election, even the support in the East End, which is like the richer, more white area, had really started to dissipate even in that area of Louisville. Seats that Republicans had held since the inception of the Metro Council started going towards Democrats, and they currently have a 19-7 majority.
Wow.
So it's just kind of an interesting story, right? So you have these two personalities, you have this major political problem, opportunities for people to both do something for their city and then potentially to do something for themselves and for their political party. A lot of Democrats really thought that this would be a terrible idea to merge the city and county because, you're basically incorporating a lot of Republicans who may strip away your votes. But what ended up happening that I think is interesting, especially for something like the Fairness Ordinance, the Fairness Ordinance would not have passed in the Jefferson County. The commissioners, the county commissioners, and the judge executive would not have passed the Fairness Ordinance. But by merging, you now have expanded those civil rights to, really hundreds of thousands more people.
Yeah.
So in some kind of ways, you just never know what politics is going to throw at you. And a lot of people are looking at the current political situation as very intractable, impossible to see what's going to happen. Clearly we're going to go one way. And even if all the signs point to things going one way, they may just go the exact opposite. So, it's just what happens in politics.
Yeah.
I do think it's worth mentioning 2020 has not exactly been a banner year for municipal government across the country. Mayor Fisher here in Louisville is facing significant backlash, I think, on both the right and the left in the wake of the Breonna Taylor killing, which I'm sure people have heard about. There's been associated protests. Both sides are really calling on him to resign for opposite reasons, though. I think it's kind of tough for him. And then in the 2020 Democratic primaries, two Democratic socialists, like Bernie Sanders type people, came really, really close to winning their seats in the Democratic primary, which would basically, they were unopposed on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And I really think that the urban core seats may become significantly more liberal and really to the point where they say liberal is not the right word.
Yeah.
And the next frontier of politics in Louisville is kind of between like the left and the further left. And Republicans having even less power than they did previously. If people are looking for something to watch, the 2022 mayoral election in Louisville will definitely be something that will be interesting. And as I'm encouraging you to care more about Louisville, it'll be fun. So you should.
I would say it will be 2022. Louisville mayor is going to be a very contested, unique race.
Very much so.
Well,
there you go. There's Louisville merger.
There you go. Well, it brings up a lot of good points because I'm sitting here thinking, you blew my mind first when you said, there's a lot more towns in Jefferson County than just Louisville, because that is the stigma. It's just Louisville. Jefferson County is Louisville.
Oh, yeah, and they each have their own little identity, even to this day. There's St. Matthews people, Crescent Hill people. I live in the Highlands, which is not really a city per se, but it's definitely a place with its own identity.
Hey, that's the hilly place, right?
There is like one hill, but I don't know why they call it the Highlands. It's just like the quirky, weird part of it.
Well, I bring that up. We came to Louisville once and did like a half marathon.
Yeah, sure.
And you can do a relay marathon too. And we did the relay, and my wife got stuck in like the Highlands, I think it was. There
is a lot of elevation gain there. Yeah. When I used to run more, I've lived here since I moved back in 2011, and it is like you can go down the hill, but you're going to have to go back up. So.
The people who were against the merger were more people from Louisville, like inside the city.
Yes.
But it still ended up working in their favor, I guess, as far as the end game.
That's kind of my opinion. I would be interested to hear, looking back on it, what a lot of these people think. I don't think that many of them have really been asked, even though they're all still around. Because I do think the real worry was that Republicans were going to come in and have more power than they did before. And really, the opposite happened. Democrats now dominate the entirety of Jefferson County. Basically, yeah.
With and because you kind of had the suburbs of Louisville were those smaller communities outside of the city, but now even as population grows, more like Oldham County and Shelbyville, those are becoming like these more Republican strongholds, if you want to say that. Like I think I was talking to somebody, and like Oldham County's population has
it's really exploded,
boomed. Just from people being in Oldham County and commuting.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. You see people move. You see all sorts of people from across the state moving to more urban areas. But then, you see a lot of people moving to the surrounding counties.
Yeah.
And Oldham County, you're right. Oldham County, for a long time, was one of the most Republican counties in the whole state. But during the most recent gubernatorial election, if you're counting counties, it's like Louisville, Lexington, and then a bunch of Republican counties, Frankfort, Franklin County, and then some places in eastern Kentucky, which I think we shouldn't discount. Northern Kentucky, absolutely, Kenton and Campbell County. But when you're looking at the majority, the vast majority, 100 probably out of 120, you're talking about Republican or more Republican. And Oldham County has certainly less Republican than it was. I think Governor Beshear lost that county by only 10 points, which would have been unheard of.
Yeah.
They actually now have a Democratic state senator. Now, people, the different chambers of the Kentucky legislature are gerrymandered in opposite directions. Where the House districts were once upon a time drawn for more Democrats, but the Senate districts were drawn for Republicans, and they looped in Oldham County with like all of the most liberal areas in Louisville, like Crescent Hill is a big one, and that really backfired on them. As Oldham County turned a little bit less Republican, and then all of the Democrats voted. So now they actually have a Democratic state senator. So you're seeing that backfiring on another level too. So for Republicans. So, but yes, Oldham County, these surrounding counties have actually gotten a little bit less Republican as people from Louisville start moving out. But it is a very, very stark, even on the precinct level. If you're looking how people vote, if you're on the Jefferson County side of the line, you're on a precinct that's voting for a Democrat. And if you're on the Oldham County side of the line, you're voting for a Republican.
Yeah.
Bullitt County, which is to our south, that is the more conservative county for sure. And that's another place where the population has really grown. And I think also that's another one of the interesting spaces. Like I think east of Louisville, you start to see more like rolling hills, like the Knobs, the Bluegrass area. And then once you go west, it's a lot different. It's more like river country. It's you got Meade County, you got Breckenridge County, like those kind of areas, which is a very, very different vibe than Shelbyville and Oldham County. Fort Knox is not quite LaGrange. That's for sure.
No, not. Well, I have loads of questions, but we'll save those maybe for another time. I got some questions for you. All right.
All right. I said I was going to get all these wrong, so we'll see what happens.
We typically, since you're from Jefferson County, I'll ask you some Jefferson County quiz questions. And honestly, I think I've had, out of all the people, maybe two out of the however many other people I guess I've had on, have gotten at least 4 to 5. Now, last one with Miss Dr. Thames.
Yeah, she nailed it. Oldham County.
Yeah, she's going to get them right. There was no way around it. But all right, first one. You mentioned this a little bit. Well, I don't know. I'll just start off. Where does Jefferson County get its name?
Oh, it's King Louis. Oh, no, Jefferson County.
Jefferson
County, not Louisville. Right, Jefferson County. Yes, it is. So it's Thomas Jefferson.
There you go. Yeah, very good.
I used to, because Lincoln County, where you're from, people always say Abraham Lincoln, but it's actually Benjamin Lincoln.
It's Benjamin Lincoln. That's right. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. So what year was Jefferson County founded?
Ooh, so that would have to be, that's the founding of Kentucky, and I should know that number off the top of my head. And oh wait, do you mean like when it was in part of Virginia, or do you? Okay. Well, then I wouldn't know that. So that would be that would probably be like. Let me guess a decade, and you can give me partial credit if I get the 1780s.
1780. That is it.
I should have just gone with a number. There you go. Okay. Yeah. So that was when it was part of Virginia, and it was Jefferson.
So the first 3 counties: Jefferson, Fayette, and Lincoln. Yeah, on 1780. Those are all
okay.
At the same time. All right. Now you about answered this one. Who's Louisville named after?
Oh yeah, King Louis, and I don't remember which King Louis. I think it's the 14th.
16th.
Yeah. 16th. All right. Well, you can give me credit or not. We used to so that's another in the current situational unrest. Of course, statues are a big issue there, and we just had to put our King Louis, who was not a good king. If you're going to take a statue down, that's one you can take down. It was a gift from France. I get that. Like, that's nice. But you get gifts from people where you want to appreciate it, but, not necessarily keep it up because it's kind of silly in the first place. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's in storage currently.
So, all right, 3 out of 3, man. You're doing good.
All right.
When was Louisville founded?
Oh, I wrote this in my notes. So I might have skipped this part, but I did look it up beforehand. I don't know if this is an open new quiz. Yeah. So 1828 is when the Kentucky legislature passed this charter.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. The first mayor was John Buckland. And the way that the mayor used to be selected was the state legislature had to pick the mayor. The city did not get to vote. Yeah. Wow. And it was a 1-year term. And this man apparently was a horrible mayor. He.
Good thing.
No. Okay. So the city did. the city didn't get to vote, but the top 2 got sent to Frankfurt, and the Frankfurt got to pick. And so,
wow.
That's actually very akin to like how people are picked in China, even like today, to run like administrative districts. Or Iran, that's how they run the presidential election. Is like it's backwards from that. In Iran, like the government picks 2 people, and then people get to pick between the 2. And anyways, so we used to be a lot more similar.
That's interesting.
Yeah, public policy background. There you go.
Yeah. So all right, so this one is try to throw a good curveball, and this one's going to be, we'll see. All right, so what orphanage did Catherine Spalding establish in Louisville?
I'm going to have to guess it's St. Joseph's.
I'll take that. It was originally St. Vincent Orphanage, but it was changed to St. Joseph Orphanage.
Yeah, so that's a huge picnic here in Louisville. Like Louisville, the religious culture of Louisville is also very interesting to talk about. I wouldn't say we're as interesting as like Marion County or some of those areas down there in terms of like how Catholics and Protestants interact. But Louisville's a very there's a lot of Catholics in this city, and each of the parishes have a big picnic. And so people go to these picnics, even Baptists like me, will go to all these picnics and drink their beer and win their cakes. But St. Joseph's is a huge one. It's a big fundraiser for that. It's it's a children's home now. Yeah. But it still exists, and it's a big deal. So they had to cancel theirs for COVID this year, but I look forward to being there next year.
Well, and Catherine Spalding, she's such an interesting character for Kentucky. Yeah. I did a little video on her. And there in Nelson County, man, it's such an odd thing when you think about Kentucky as a whole that there was this pocket of Catholics in Nelson County that same time everybody else was showing up, they were showing up there.
All right, then you absolutely have to read Cornbread Mafia. There's nothing else to it because this is all about that area and how like the Catholics and Protestants. You can have James on your show at some point.
There we go. Yeah. Well, Robert, thanks so much for coming, and I know we. You got a young one there, all that stuff. Fatherhood's a tough, a new adventure, right?
It is. It's a new adventure. We're really excited to start on the journey. It's been a long time coming. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the Kentucky History Podcast. Big fan, long-time listener, first-time caller. So very excited to be on. Awesome. We'll do it again sometime if you want to have me back.
Well, tell everybody where they can connect to you.
Yeah. So if you want to reach out to me. I'm pretty active on Twitter at RKAHNE. You can also find my podcast, My Old Kentucky Podcast. I do that along with my very good friend, Jasmine Smith. You can find that at any podcast app that you like to use. Whichever one you're listening to this on, just search My Old Kentucky Podcast for there. Right listen to one. You don't like, you don't have to listen to them anymore. But you can find me there. Code for Kentuckiana, really cool organization where we try to improve, civic technology in Louisville and Southern Indiana. So that's another thing we're active in doing. So anyways, those are the places you can find me. And thank you. I have enjoyed being introduced to your listeners.
Oh, well, we appreciate you coming on, and I hope everybody learned a little bit about Louisville that they did not know. And check out your podcast as well. It's really good. I want to maybe push that local Kentucky politics or policies and the laws and stuff. It covers it all. It's a great podcast to be informed about.
Yes, we cared deeply about the state of Kentucky and the city of Louisville, which are in some ways the same thing. Even our state seal, of course, is one way to look at the urban-rural divide and warning against it. With I don't know if it's supposed to be Henry Clay and Daniel Boone, but a frontiersman and a statesman, rural and urban people saying, "United we stand and divided we fall." So, thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, thanks for being here. And if you want to check it out again, search whatever you listen to on this. You can find his podcast on there as well. And we'll have him back definitely to talk some more Louisville history because we got to get more of that history going on. If there's nothing else, we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.